Welcome, everybody. My name is Rebecca Peo, and I'm the Director of Mentoring with the Colorado Attorney Mentoring Program, or CAMP. Thank you for joining us. Our presenter today will be discussing charting your career path, navigating career trajectories in law, and it qualifies for one general CLE credit, which I will put in the course. I will put the course ID in the chat at the end. So just a few housekeeping items. We will be in webinar mode, so we can't see or hear the attendees. So if you have tech issues, we won't be able to help you. You can log back in, and sometimes that resolves the issue. You can put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, which will be saved for the end of the presentation. And the recording will be available for replay on our social media channels later today. Our presenter is Marion Lee, and she is an executive coach with Beard Strategies, a former practicing lawyer, and is now a consultant and coach. And I will turn it over to her.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you so much for having me today. It's really an honor. So I'm on my third career, so I have some experience with career transition. In my first career, I took a fairly traditional path. I graduated from DU, started as an associate at a firm where I had clerked during law school. I practiced litigation at a few different firms and was part of a group that started our own firm at one point. And I had a solo practice for a while. In my second career, I became a professional development director in a law firm. And in that job, I supported the firm's partners in their management skills and help the associates develop their practice skills. And then after 10 years in professional development, I trained to become a certified coach and started my own coaching practice. So in addition to consulting with law firms from time to time, I coach lawyers on things like leadership skills, business development, and reaching the next level in their career. I also coach people on career transitions. So in fact, when I opened my practice 8 years ago, most of my work was this kind of coaching. I was amazed, like after I told people what I was doing and I put up my website, I was amazed at how many lawyers came to me because they were dissatisfied with what they were doing and they wanted to find a new path forward. So today we're going to talk about the nature of transition and offer you some tools for moving yourself forward in an intentional way. So this is where I'm going to be technologically challenged, but how many of you have made a career transition? Can you raise your hands if there's any of you? And Rebecca, you may have to tell me if there's any hands raised because I can't see everything.
Marion, we're seeing a number of hands. They could also put it in the chat.
Awesome. And if you're willing to share, could you put in the chat box what prompted you to make a change in just a few words? And Rebecca, if you could read any that's appearing.
Clarity of purpose. Plateauing in former career unrelated to law practice. Burnout.
Absolutely, absolutely. So lots of factors can lead us to consider a transition. Or sometimes a transition is forced on us through a layoff or a need to move somewhere for a partner's job. So in this program, we're going to explore what to do when you feel like you need to make a change. Let's start by looking at the transition process itself. This is a model by Dr. Frederick Hudson, who was an educator, writer, and researcher in adult development. His view was that adult life doesn't follow a linear progression, the way it used to be talked about, years and years ago. You do this, then this, then this. And he said, no, that is not how life works. It's lived in a series of chapters. And this applies to life, it applies to careers and other things. Transitions are a normal part of life, and we're always at some point on this cycle of change, which he called the cycle of renewal. The first phase of the cycle is called go for it. This is where you are at the beginning, like you just got out of law school, you're just starting your first job, and you're all excited, and everything is new and fresh, and you're eager. It's a high energy phase, and it's like we wish we could always be in this phase, but Unfortunately, we can't. It's quite natural at some point to kind of drift into the next phase, which is called the doldrums. The novelty has worn off, things aren't as great anymore, you're having some challenges. And that is normal. This happens to everyone. You're a little bit disenchanted. And so if it persists to the point where you think you need to do something, you have two choices, really, a mini transition or a life transition under this model. So most times when we get in the doldrums and we feel stuck there, we can kind of refresh the current chapter and get back to that go for it phase without a major change. You might just tweak a few things. You might move into a different office, get a new type of assignment, work with a new team. Any number of small changes can re-energize us and put us back into that go for it phase. And this is what, again, Hudson calls a mini transition, restructuring your current chapter. But sometimes there are points in life, and it's usually not very often, but sometimes when the current chapter isn't working, small changes just aren't enough. And that's when we move into a life transition. After we realize that we're going to have to do something a little bit more drastic, we drop into a phase called cocooning. This is a place of reflection, introspection, figuring out what went wrong and what you want next. It's a place of uncertainty. And it can be very uncomfortable. We like certainty. We like to know what's happening, and to sit and to wonder and to think about what we want to do next can be difficult at times, but it's a very important phase. At some point, we figure out what we want to do next, though, and we move into this last phase, getting ready, which is another high energy phase because we know where we're pointed now. We know what we want to do next. And now we're actually taking steps to prepare for that next chapter and then eventually launch back into go for it. So let's take a few minutes to process these ideas. If you're willing to share, those of you who have made transitions in the chat, can you tell us first just a brief transition you made in your career? And second, whether any aspects of this cycle of renewal model resonate with you based on your experience.
Again, a reminder to our participants, we can't see you. So if you have any comments, to put them in the chat. Marion, I'm not seeing any comments. If you'd like to repeat the question.
Yeah. Is there a transition that you can recall making in your life? And if so, are there any aspects of this model that resonate for you? And that's okay if they don't. For some people, this is very new, and this is, kind of a little bit abstract. So it's totally fine if that's the case. Let's dig in a little deeper. One way to look at this process is to break it into inner work and outer work. So the inner work is things like gaining clarity on where you are, reflecting on what you do and don't want in the next chapter, recognizing that you are in a transition and being kind to yourself. All of these things are aspects of the inner work that we do as we're in the process of transition. And then it also involves outer work. That's things, the more concrete, tangible things that are more visible. And that's like identifying options, researching, connecting with others. And we're going to talk about all of these in more detail. The first step of the inner work is to get clear on what didn't work in the past, why you feel motivated to make a change. So this is a tool by Robert Dilts. It's called the Logical Levels Model. It provides a framework for identifying what's causing dissatisfaction and determining how significant a change is needed to address it. So it contains a hierarchy of levels, and it can be helpful at sorting through the roots of dissatisfaction. The higher up you go, and it's a little counterintuitive that way, but the higher up you go, the more deeply rooted the dissatisfaction is. So for example, you'd start by looking at the first level, your work environment. Is that where my dissatisfaction is? Is it related to the location of my work, who I'm working with, my hours? Factors at this level can be the easiest to change, sometimes without even changing jobs. The next level to explore is behaviors, what you do in your job. Do you enjoy the tasks you perform? If the dissatisfaction is here, again, you may be able to move into a different role or department and have a positive change. A little deeper is the capability level. Are you satisfied with the knowledge and skills and competencies you use in your job? Are you developing the abilities you want to? Are you fully utilizing the skills you have? The next level is identity. Do you like the person you are when you're doing this job? And then at the deepest level is purpose. Why are you doing this job? And does this align generally with your mission in life? So looking at these levels can help you evaluate what kind of change you need to make. So for example, if the source of your dissatisfaction is a misalignment of your values and those of the organization, just changing the location of your office or your tasks and responsibilities won't resolve it, at least not in the long run. You need to make a change at the level that matches your dissatisfaction. The example I always use is that when I practiced law, I became dissatisfied several times and changed firms. I had friends who commented on this and called me, said I had a desk on wheels. But what I was doing was I'd be dissatisfied and I'd change my environment. But eventually I realized that my real issue was that I wanted to teach people more than I wanted to litigate. So my dissatisfaction was at the values and identity levels. So when I only changed the environment, the environmental level, I ran into the same issues again and again. So it wasn't until actually I went to coach training that I understood why the changes I made before just weren't enough. So this first step is really important to the transition process. If you don't take the time to fully understand what didn't work in the current chapter, you're likely to bring some of those same factors into the next one. It's kind of like an analogy I use is marriage. It's like if you get a divorce and get remarried right away without figuring out what went wrong and what was your part in it, your chances of success in the next one may not be so great. So it's always important to figure out what wasn't working. Now we can probably skip this if we want to, but does anybody want to share the last job you left? At what level was your main source of dissatisfaction? And then did your next position align with what you needed at that level? If anybody would like to share on that, please feel free.
Would it be possible to distribute the slides after the presentation? Can you, that's the question that came in the chat.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, the bottom line is that not every change you make is going to increase your ultimate satisfaction, even if the change is for more money or a seemingly better position.
Marion, we have one comment. I left based on identity and purpose factors.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, those are big ones. And again, if you then go back to something that's just the same kind of environment, you might not address those factors. You need to go to somewhere that aligns with your purpose and identity. So once you've determined the source of your dissatisfaction, what you don't want in the next chapter, it's time to think about what you do want. You may not know exactly what position you want, but you can usually identify some important characteristics that you want it to have. So for example, look at your values and the priority they have in your life right now. Values are things like challenging work, learning new things, independence, work-life balance, all of those. What's most important right now, that's what you need to focus on, because the priority of your values may be different now from when you first started your career. They change throughout our lives. For example, when you're first out of law school, getting good experience and making income to pay off student loans might be your highest priorities, of course. After you have a family, work-life balance might become the priority. And later on, when your kids are grown, you've got a nest egg, helping others in a socially significant way might take priority. So it all depends on where you are in life and what your circumstances are. You also want to look at your energy level. Think about your best and worst days in your past job situations. What kinds of tasks or activities energized you? What did you really love doing on your best days, and what depleted you? For some people, for example, going to court is torture. For others, it's what they live for. So only you know which parts of the job energize and deplete you. Next, take a look at the strengths you want to use. Think about your biggest accomplishments, the times when you felt on top of the world. What strengths were you using? What abilities would you like to develop in your next job that you don't have yet? A lot of people who make transitions leave jobs because they don't have opportunities to do the things they do best and they feel underutilized. It can be a huge boost to move into something that challenges you and uses your talents. With your motivators and desires in mind, the next step is to consider the level of change you need to make within the context of a legal career. As a lawyer, your options typically follow along a continuum into 4 categories. 1, improve satisfaction in your current position. Again, this is kind of like a mini transition. Sometimes you can make a few tweaks and feel re-energized about your job again. Another option to consider is practicing law in another environment. Maybe it's a different firm, an in-house situation, a government agency, somewhere where you'll use your skills in a different way, or maybe even work in new practice areas. A third option is to use your law degree without actually practicing. These are called, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them, JD Advantage jobs. There are a host of opportunities for JDs in business management, banking, nonprofits, other industries where your legal knowledge is really valuable and helpful, but no license to practice is required because you're not actually practicing law. Or, of course, there's always the option to leave law altogether. As you might expect, the further you go to the right on the continuum, the bigger the change, the more preparation you'll probably need to do. And in most cases, the economic impact will be greater. Some additional kind of practical considerations you'll want to think about. How much income do you need right now, given your financial commitments and other resources? Location, are you willing to relocate? Training and education, what resources can you devote to learning a new occupation? And timeline, how long can you stay in your current situation? So this is a really important one because most of my clients who I work with on transitions, they don't have the luxury of reaching the doldrums and then quitting their job and then spending full time focusing on finding their next chapter or their next job. Most people have to stay in their current situation while they explore what's next, and sort of like being physically in the doldrums, but mentally in cocooning and getting ready for the next chapter. So it helps if you have some lead time to work on kind of solving this and figuring out what's next. So once you have an idea of the scale of change you need to make a list of 3 to 5 possible scenarios that might fit your criteria. This is just a hypothetical kind of list that somebody might make, and there is no certain form it would need to take. And again, anything, just scratching it down on paper. And don't think of this list as permanent or binding. It's just a tool. Sometimes clients of mine hesitate to write anything down because they feel like they're committing, and it's way too early in the process. But this list is just a starting point for your exploration. You can start with a gut feeling and sometimes something you've heard about or something you've always wanted to do. So for each scenario that you think of, write down the pros and cons that you can think of. Then make a note of the things you don't know that you'd like to find out, like the salary it pays or the types of organizations that hire these types of professionals. So in my example here, one potential scenario is state AG's office, meaningful work, no billable hours. That's appealing to lots of people coming out of firms. But the pay in some cases may be less than what people are used to. And the government does have a fairly rigid organizational structure. Unknowns, advancement opportunities, areas of practice. That's things you have to research in order to figure out whether that's a viable option for you, whether it's desirable, or whether you want to toss it off your list. So again, as you get more information, you'll likely discard some options and add new ones. The scenario list is always a work in progress. So once you have your list of scenarios, it's time to research them. What's the market like? What kind of entities might employ you? What does it take to get qualified? I mean, obviously, you can start with a Google search. You can also look on LinkedIn Jobs, Indeed, or any other job source for detailed job descriptions. And those are good starting places. But the best information about what it's like to do a particular job comes directly from people who do that kind of work. You can't truly understand what it's like to do a particular job just from the internet research or reading job postings. Go talk to people who do what you want to do, and talk to people who can connect you to those people. And always, start easy and work your way out. So start with close friends, past colleagues, and then branch out from there. Your LinkedIn network can be extremely valuable for locating people who know people in the area you want to go into. And keep in mind that some of your most valuable sources of information are likely to be what's called loose ties. That is, people who are a few degrees removed from your inner circle. The main benefit of these conversations, I know some of you who may have explored this and gotten career counseling in law school, we're told about informational interviews. That's one way to describe these, but the main benefit of these connecting conversations is that you get valuable information from a firsthand source about a particular type of job. Remember, this isn't asking for a job or even a lead. You're asking for information about what it's like to do the particular kind of job. And that's what makes it different from an actual interview. It's a lot more comfortable. The other person doesn't feel on the spot. You don't have to sell yourself. And that doesn't mean you don't want to make a good impression, but there's no selling involved. People are often very generous when it comes to sharing their career experiences with you. You'll be surprised. So this is a chance to learn about what it takes to get into the field, what kind of competencies you need to have, and what's the day-to-day like? Like, what do you like best? What don't you like about this? So when I was transitioning out of law practice, I had 15 or 20 of these conversations to learn about the field of lawyer professional development. I talked with partners who supervise associates, legal administrators, and eventually connected with people who were actually directors of professional development. I didn't even know that field existed when I started out in my exploration. So number one is you get great information from these. Number two, in addition to that, each person you meet expands your network. You're making a connection in the field that you're thinking of entering, which can be really valuable later on. And then third, you just never know where these connections will lead. Again, the purpose is not to land a job, and you shouldn't go into these conversations expecting it to lead directly there. But once in a while, a person that you talk to in this process will hear of something later and pass it along. It's uncanny how often that happens. It's like, oh yeah, I just talked to Joe like 3 weeks ago, and now here's that job he wants to do. I think I'll let him know about it. So for many people, I totally get it. These conversations are challenging, outside your comfort zone, but it really can be the most valuable part of the process. So once you're in these conversations, keep it short and simple. Ideally, 15 to 20 minutes per conversation, depending, like if it's somebody you've known a long time, of course you can go longer, but you really want to respect people's time. Be prepared, know what you want to ask them, and then at the end, thank the person and ask if they can think of anybody else you should talk to. It's like breadcrumbs or following a trail. It's like one person leads you to another, and it's amazing where it can lead if you actually do this process. I had a client once, like for an example, she worked in a small law firm, and she was really unhappy where she was, and she wasn't going to become a partner. So she thought she wanted to become a partner in another small law firm. She started going to talk to people in firms and actually did a few interviews. And she learned about what it was like and what was expected. And she learned, for example, that she was, if she became a partner at this other firm, she was expected to have a book of business, and, so much of percentage of revenues would be shared with her, and, their whole formula. And the fact was, she actually did have some of her own clients. But what she realized after gaining more information was that that was not going to be a better situation for her. but actually she probably had enough clients to go out on her own and start her own practice. So again, it's something you learn things later that you didn't know in the beginning. So the process of evaluating options is ongoing. And for a while, steps 4 and 5 will be a cyclical process. You'll investigate, evaluate, toss out some options, add on some new ones, investigate again, evaluate. Once you've been exploring and evaluating for a while, a leading scenario is likely to emerge, something that energizes you, meets your criteria, and fits with your priorities and values. If a particular scenario makes your short list, see if there's a way to try it out. Take a course or a volunteer in that field if that makes sense. Shadow someone if you can, but learn as much as you can about what it takes to do it, what it will feel to do it, if that's possible. It's not always possible, but choose your scenario and then move forward. Once you've chosen your target, make a specific plan. This is the getting ready phase. So break it down into small, specific steps. I know many of you have heard this before, but this is where most plans fall apart. The goals are too broad and vague. Oh, go find a job at, in the aerospace industry. That's too broad, too vague. It takes too much energy to figure out how to make progress. What you need to do are write down very specific action items. For example, I'm going to email person A, person B, and person C on Monday. Or I'm going to spend 20 minutes researching in-house jobs on Tuesday. Very specific, very doable chunks. The more you break it up and the more you actually find yourself completing these action items, the more motivated you'll be to keep going with it. After you've identified your target, you're going to still do these connecting conversations, but now they're going to be a little more focused. So instead of like, what's it like to do the job? What do you like about it? You're going to focus more on how did you get there? What experience and training did you have in order to get there? And how did you actually find the position? Yes, of course, you can always just send a blind resume to job postings. Just be aware that the majority of people don't get their jobs that way. They get them from contacts. And it doesn't have to be a contact who's like the CEO of a company. It could just be knowing one person at an organization. And then you apply there, and then that person says, "Oh yeah, I know Marion. She's great. You should interview her." It's just knowing a person in the organization makes you less unknown, put it that way, than somebody sending in a blind resume. And I tell this to my clients because when they come to me early on, they want to, before they've fully really explored what it is they want to do next, they just want to be sending out resumes all the time and applying for jobs. They want to feel like they're taking action. And I tell them, you can do that if you want to, but don't be surprised if nothing comes of it. And usually nothing does. And they get a little discouraged. But it's like, once you actually know what you want to do and you've researched it and you've talked to people in that field, your resume is going to look better. It's going to be more targeted and focused, and you're going to interview so much better because you have knowledge of the things that they're going to ask you about, and you've done some research. So once you know what you're targeting, prepare your narrative and your communication plan. Be prepared to answer these questions. Where have you been on your career journey, and why was it valuable, right? How does it pertain to what you want to do? Why did I decide to make a change? And what am I seeking going forward? So example, my narrative, where have I been? I practiced law for 16 years, learned a lot about lawyer development. I decided to make a change because I really like training and mentoring more than litigating. And going forward, I'd like to find a position in the law firm, training and developing associates. That's where I was many years ago. Once you have a cohesive narrative, incorporate it into your materials, into your resume, which of course it's going to be tweaked for every position you apply for. But have your resume tell that story, especially in your summary at the top. Your cover letters should also tell your story. your LinkedIn profile, all of it should be very consistent. Your notes when you're going to have connecting conversations. This is what you're going to tell people when you talk to them, and especially for job interviews when you make notes and outlines for that. Your narrative is going to be a very, very central part of your search and your ability to move forward. So this may be the most important message in the whole process. Keep moving forward. This whole process takes time, usually at least 6 months to a year, depending on what you're looking at getting into. Keep up the momentum. Look at your plan and your action items. Almost every day, you should be able to take at least one step that moves you forward, even if it's a small one. It might be something like adding some connections on LinkedIn, researching a new career possibility, or setting up a Zoom call to connect with someone. The more action you take, especially if it involves communicating with other people, the faster you're going to see results. It's very much about continual, consistent action, even when it gets discouraging. Continue chipping away. It is almost, it's not a formula by any means, but it's almost a kind of a numbers game. The volume of actions you take directly impacts the results that you're going to get. And it's when you get discouraged and stop taking action that, of course, nothing happens. So keep moving forward is one of the most important parts of advice. Also, you want to consider a multi-step process. In some cases, after all the exploration, you may decide it makes the most sense to stay where you are. And that's a valid outcome. It doesn't mean you wasted your time. You continue in your position with a much deeper understanding of its advantages against other options. You see it in a whole new way. And you don't have to wonder, well, I wonder if I would have gone and tried this other thing. You don't have to wonder because you did go explore that and you decided that wasn't the best option, that staying put was the best. I had a client who practiced law and he felt like his career was stagnating. He was thinking of actually leaving the profession. He investigated some options. One was becoming a facilities manager for a large sports arena. I'm not sure how he came up with that, but he thought that sounded pretty interesting. After he talked to people and learned more about it, though, he learned there was a high level of competition for those jobs, and it would take at least 5 to 10 years to build the qualifications. And then when he finally got there, he'd make a fraction of his current salary. He also, at the same time, talked to some partners at his firm, and he learned that he actually had a pretty good shot at becoming a partner. So ultimately, after considering all the possible scenarios, he realized that his current position was probably his best choice for right now. He decided to stay at his firm and work towards becoming a partner. Or if your ultimate goal is going to take you a really long time to reach, consider a multi-step process covering the short term and the long term. So I had a client, for example, an environmental lawyer who, through our coaching work, determined that she wanted to become an environmental policy advisor. She knew she needed to get more experience to go in that direction, like working on research projects and getting published. So for the short term, she took a job as an associate in a different environmental firm, but she made a plan to get the policy training she would need to eventually make her ultimate move in maybe 5 to 10 years. So again, we're not always able to go to our dream job overnight. Sometimes there are intermediate steps we need to take in order to get there. So the intermediate step might be staying where you are, continuing preparation, going to school, getting a degree. It could be any number of things, but it still feels good because you're taking action, even if you're still in the chapter you want to eventually change. With a plan, you can keep moving forward and stay motivated by your progress, even if your ultimate goal is several years away. And then once you do arrive at the goal job, say you've gone through this whole process and you have got a job that you're really excited about, you're back in that go for it phase. That's fantastic, but don't stop developing. Don't stop growing. Don't stop building your value, both in terms of to your firm or to your organization, but also your career value, your portable skills, those things that are going to help you have lots of options later. Because it's really easy once you reach that job that you're really excited about to kind of sit back and go, okay, now I can put my career on autopilot and just coast, or I'll work really hard at this. But and then I'm not saying you should be thinking of the next phase right away, because that's not what you should do. Focus on what you're doing and do it well. But at the same time, continue building relationships, continue learning new skills, continue growing yourself, so that eventually, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or more down the road, the more you've continued to grow yourself and your relationships, the more options you're going to have. And the easier the next transition is going to be. So as we're wrapping up our program today, I want to leave you with a thought before we go to questions. And this is a quote I like. It's, change is inevitable. The trick in life is not to try to avoid change, but to create the change. And then it's the change you choose. That's the key phrase, the change you choose. Whatever's prompting you to make a change, be intentional about creating your next chapter. As I was saying before, lots of people who are dissatisfied with their jobs automatically go to job postings, apply for jobs, and go somewhere else, only to run into the same issues all over again, like I did, frankly. But if you do the work of exploring where your dissatisfaction really lies, what's most important to you, and what possibilities are out there, you're much more likely to find career satisfaction. It takes longer to create the change you choose, a lot longer than to just jump over to another job. But at the end of the day, if it's carefully considered, it might be the last career change you ever need to make. So at this point, I would be happy to entertain any questions, if there are any.
We've got one, Marion. Can you give some concrete, hold on, I've got to scroll down. Can you give some concrete examples of getting into the go-getter stage, stage 1, without making major changes? What if you are content and satisfied in your current position, but have some restlessness? Some ideas for keeping work fresh would be much appreciated.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. So it's very dependent on what your situation is, what kind of organization you work for, whether you're in a firm or in-house or other kind of organization. But common ones would be, is there a new duty that you can take on, a new responsibility, somewhere that you'd like to grow? And so asking your boss, can I expand my responsibilities? Is there room for promotion, or just doing some new things? Can I do some training within my organization? That can be really refreshing in terms of, if you've been there a while, sharing your knowledge with newer people in the organization. So just making a change that doesn't require you to leave, but usually it's growing in your skills, learning something new, sometimes changing departments. Sometimes it's, just redecorating your office at a very minimal level. It's funny how people I've known have actually benefited from that as well. So make a list for yourself and consider some things to try.
We've got one more question. How do you recommend navigating simultaneous and sometimes competing goals of wanting to progress in your current job and planning for the future in case another opportunity doesn't pan out, while also wanting to make a career pivot?
Yeah, so that can be very challenging, and that kind of goes along with the scenario of having to be in your current position while you're thinking about the next level. And sometimes, obviously, many legal jobs are very demanding, and it's not like you usually have a ton of extra time to do this. But it's setting aside a little bit of time every week, or if you can, for researching, figuring out what's next, exploring what the next phase might be. Or if you know what the next phase is, setting some action items for yourself, getting some new training, meeting some people who are doing that. So it is a juggling because, again, law can be so demanding time-wise. But set aside time, just decide to dedicate, even if it's 20 minutes, half an hour a week. Spend some time researching and taking some of these steps that'll push you in that new direction.
Excellent. We've got another question. Are there any resources you would recommend to attorneys considering transition to a JD Advantage job to identify potential options? This seems like a large universe, and attorneys may not even know all of the options that exist.
Yeah, well, so now this one I'm going to sound like a cop-out, but you can Google JD Advantage jobs, and there will be articles and resources there. And I'm pretty sure the ABA website has some free resources on that. And they've done some research on popular, career paths for JDs who don't actually want to practice anymore. So on that particular one, I would recommend a regular Google search and going to the ABA website.
Okay, and another question. How do you balance the necessity of a change for your well-being with the timeline for a career change?
So these are the kind of factors that you have to weigh. So if I understand correctly, and if I have this wrong, please, you can send a chat and correct me. But sometimes it's like you being in a job is affecting your well-being negatively. And that can really be the case. I have coached lawyers who are very, very burnt out and really want to get out of their current situation, but it's going to take time to find something else and to get placed. Now, again, if you have the luxury of quitting a job and then pausing before you starting something new, that's just fine. But for most people, that's not the case. So you have to, you can really do that calculus of how much is it impacting me to stay? Is there anything I can do to make it better? Sometimes it's relationships that are the problem. Can I go talk to somebody? Can I try to clear the air? Can I ease some of the stress from this job? And so finding ways within the parameters of where you are, make sure you've explored every possibility for alleviating that source of stress or unwellness, if that's the case that you're feeling. But it's really not a perfect situation. You do your best to get through the current situation. Another tool is really, really focusing on only the aspects that you like. And that can be hard to do, but if you have a job that has a bunch of aspects you don't like, focus on the things you really do like about it. And just, don't spend a lot of mental energy on the other areas until you actually can take some time to address your situation.
Okay, this is a question for me. How do we get CLE credit for this presentation? I've put the course ID in the chat. You go to the Supreme Court website for the affidavit to submit, and you get credit for it. I actually have a question for you, Marion. Are there some patterns that you see in lawyers making career transitions, specifically, or perhaps to nuance it in newer attorneys versus mid-career attorneys, some generalized patterns that you see, or are they specific to these different groups?
There are always there are people in any of those groups that sometimes want to make transitions, but some of the attorneys that I've seen most are in the 8 to 12 year range. It's very common at that point to want to consider something else. And different people have come from different backgrounds, but a lot of times if you come from a law firm and then you get caught up in that whole making partner thing, and either for many people that's just not appealing, or they don't see themselves doing the things that are expected in order to build a book of business, or there's just no room for new partners where they are. I mean, so that's just a very common time to want to look at something new. And the advantage of that is that by then they've usually got some very good experience. So a lot of portable skills that we can kind of reshape into a different path. So that's pretty common. I was very surprised a few years ago. I had maybe three within 6 months. I had three potential clients call me. I didn't end up working with them, but they were like first and second year associates. That was really surprising to me, but they had just gotten started. And it turned out eventually for two of the three that they needed a new supervisor. So that made transfers or went to a new firm, and things were much better. So those were the lower level kinds of change that were needed in those cases. So yeah, so often, mid-career and then occasionally the newer ones. What's really, what I've had a few of that really distresses me is when I've had like 2 and 3 year attorneys who have, really been challenged to find a full-time position. Maybe when they graduated law school, the market was not good, and they did a lot of contract attorney work. And I would hear horror stories about the ways some practitioners use contract attorneys. So, just not paying them for most of their hours. When you're a young attorney, when you're a new attorney, you need experience, and things are going to take you longer to do. And in the case of at least one or two practitioners that I heard about, they would hire this very junior lawyer to do research and writing, and then the lawyer would send them a bill, and the contractor would send the lawyer a bill, and he'd pay like half of what was billed, because saying, look, this should have only taken 4 hours, not 8. And it's like, the pressure is all there to not take the time that's needed to do a quality product, and they're not giving you the feedback and the training that you'd really like to have in your first few years of practice. So just caution junior lawyers about going to contract work. I mean, sometimes we don't have a lot of choices, but it can be a very non-ideal situation.
Thank you, Marion. We still have a little bit of time left if anyone has any other questions. All right. Well, we'll give you back 10 minutes of your time today. The course ID is in the chat. Thank you, Marion, for a very inspiring presentation. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. Our next event will be September 18th at 12 o'clock. Barriers to Well-Being and Causes of Impairment. Registration can be found on our website. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for coming.